Hey guys, this is Saga here with another devlog video to show you the progress of Lisbeth 3.0 so far. Sorry if I haven't been able to answer that many questions on the Discord channel lately. I've been spending all my time basically on getting the Lisbeth 3.0 beta out as soon as possible. So these past few days I've been working on this exclusively. Basically what I want is to release a beta which will allow Lisbeth to craft even though it won't probably gather or grind yet. This is because I know that the previous version of Lisbeth is having troubles with crafting Stormblood content, and I think right now what most people need is a way to craft more than gather or anything else, so I'm pushing for that. Uh, Basically, in the last 3 or 4 days, I've been working on two aspects, mainly the Lisbeth UI a bit, but also the order generation, which is a cornerstone of Lisbeth, and the macro system, which is much more powerful this time around since it has actual conditionals and it has an override system. Uh, we'll see that in a bit. So let me show you how it's looking so far. This is the new UI. You can see it's completely different. I've tried to make it a little bit more cleaner than the previous Lisbeth. Um, a lot of the settings aren't there yet. This is because, well, most of this I really don't consider essential, at least right now, since Lisbeth should be able to work with default settings optimally. So, for example, stealth and all of that. Well, Lisbeth should be smart enough to know when to use stealth and when not. Um, right, so I'll leave that until last, probably. So right now, what I'm working on and almost finishing is the order generation system, which is completely different from the previous Lisbeth, and the macro system, which we'll see in a bit. So first of all, gear sets. You need to enter your gear sets, as always. This time around though, I made it simpler for you. You just have to press a button. You can click auto to make sure you don't have any settings windows open and you're in a safe spot in the game, and just click auto. You'll see that it'll start changing automatically and adding all your gear sets automatically. Here's the index. You can see the progress and all that. Let's just give it a minute here to finish. That's it. Stop. And that's it. All your gear sets are entered. And this is important because this time around, your gear sets actually have much more information than just your index and job like before. It has your stats. It has specialization, for example. I'm specialist in Weaver. I'm not specialist in Blacksmith. You get the idea. It actually uses these stats now in order generation. So when generating suborders, it's a very complicated process, but it basically uses a lot of parameters from which zones you can fly in to your stats for each job, the relevant stats for each job, to your specializations, to books you have unlocked, and a lot of stuff. Um, so yeah, basically your gear sets are much more important this time around, but thankfully you can just click one button and get them all entered. Let's see. So orders. So how do you create orders with a new Lisbeth? Well, I try to make it as simple as possible for beginners and people who have used Lisbeth previously. Well, they can further customize things, but honestly, for most use cases, it should be a fairly simple process. Just click add. You'll see a few things here. First of all, well, most buttons are self-explanatory, right? This is for enabling, disabling. This is to remove the order. This is to move it up and down. We'll get to this color in a bit. That's something new. So to start, so let's say you're new to Lisbeth. Well, how do you make an order? Well, you just click add and you click on the order. You can start typing. Once you have your gear sets entered, that's important. You can search for whatever item you want Lisbeth to make for you. So let's say, I don't know, iron, Elmo. So you can see a few things here. You can see the class armor. It now has little icons for easier recognition. You can also hover. You can hover over most things in this Lisbeth. I've been trying to add tooltips to almost everything, even to obvious things like remove. For example, import orders from a JSON file. You know, you get the idea. You create orders for everything currently displayed on your recipe window in game, for example, auto, expand. You get the idea. So iron almond, let's see. So you actually have to select, of course, the option you want. Once you select it, you can see the advanced options, but again, if you are new to Lisbeth, you don't have to mess with this. Rotation should be blank for the most part. This means Lisbeth is going to pick the best crafting strategy it can find for your current stats and for the recipe level and all that. But you can force a macro on a primary order, and this is a term you'll be hearing a lot on this video. These orders that you make, I call them primary orders, right? Then we open the expansion window. All of this is what Lisbeth generates automatically, and these are the sub orders, or you can call them secondary orders, I guess. You can see that one primary order generates a lot of sub orders, and this is the magic of the order generation. This is one of the cornerstones of Lisbeth, right? That it takes care of calculating materials, how to get them, and all that. You can see the expansion window has changed a little bit. It'll show you primary orders in blue, and it'll show you the icons of each thing. It's going to buy iron rivets. It's going to craft iron plates with armor. It's going to grind outgoat skin. This is the grind icon. I don't know if it has a tooltip. No, it doesn't have a tooltip. I have to add that. It's going to gather alumen, and you get the idea. Leather worker. So you can change the amount here, of course, and this changes all of this, of course. So quicksynth, collectible, and so on. Food is missing. I still haven't been able to implement food. It's after macros. After I release the macro beta, that's the first thing I'm going to work on. Food. Let's add another order. Iron. So something that changed with search is that on the previous list, that you actually had to start typing the item's name from start to finish. So for example, if you wanted to find hempen yarn, you had to type hempen yarn, right? But now it searches by keywords. So for example, you can just type yarn, and you'll see a lot of items that have yarn on their name. So for example, hempen yarn. And again, now this is important. Previously on the previous list, but I don't know if you remember, you had two expansion modes, right? You had sequential and you had simultaneous. Now, let me explain a little bit what these modes are and why they exist. So basically, Lisbeth, let's pick a better order here. I run something that shares items with the other one. I don't know, Spatha, I guess. All right, the iron plates. No, Spatha doesn't use plates. What can we do with iron? Iron. There we go. Iron plate belt. That should have iron plates. All right. Yeah. Basically, what is simultaneous? Well, when Lisbeth generates all of these sub orders for your primary orders, it tries to be as efficient as possible. So basically, what it does is it considers these primary orders as being executed simultaneously. What that means is two things. First, that it's never going to use the final product of a primary order as a component for another order. Basically, you're telling Lisbeth, hey, I want these items on my inventory when you're done, right? So even if you add, for example, an iron plate, you can see in the suborders that these two items here use iron plates. That's why it's going to craft 12 of them. But it's also going to craft another one, an extra one, and it's not going to use this iron plate as a subcomponent for these two orders. That's what simultaneous means. It means it's going to execute these primary orders simultaneously, as if they were simultaneous. And the second thing about that is that by trying to be as efficient as possible, it'll consolidate components for all orders into a single suborder. So basically, these two orders, the iron elmo and iron plate belt, both use iron plates as a suborder, right? But you can see that there is only one iron plate suborder in the list, excluding the primary iron plate order, of course. And this is because if we disable iron plate, sorry, you can see that it's now 10. If we enable it, it's now 12. Basically, what Lisbeth does is, in simultaneous orders, it consolidates everything into as little orders as possible, suborders as possible, to be as efficient as possible. Because now, instead of having to go and gather iron ore and then craft iron plate and then craft the iron elmo and then repeat the entire process with for the iron plate belt, it's going to gather iron ore once, or by in this case, and it's going to craft iron plates once. And so it's less zone transitions, less job switching. It's more efficient basically. There's a problem with this, and is that even though it's more efficient in time, in inventory space, it's less efficient because it's going to gather and stuff, buy stuff from vendors and grind stuff before it starts to craft to be more efficient, right? But that means that if you have a lot of orders here that require a lot of different components, your inventory is going to be full before even sits down and craft, right? So that's going to cause Lisbeth to stop, because Lisbeth can't continue if your inventory fills up. It's a safeguard it has. So in that circumstance, it's actually bad to be uh, executing orders in a simultaneous manner. There's another circumstance where you'd prefer something different, and it's when you're leveling up, because you don't want to say you have iron ingot here and then a higher level item here, and you want Lisbeth to execute them in order to level up. Then this is not going to happen, right? Because this order you see here is not the actual order in which Lisbeth is going to execute these orders. Too much order, I guess. Let's call position, all right? So the position of the orders here is not guaranteed by Lisbeth in simultaneous mode, because what actually happens is that Lisbeth, these orders are simply data. They aren't like say an order board profile that has all the logic in it in a sequential manner. No, these orders are just data. And so the actual order processor, which is another cornerstone of Lisbeth, picks which order to do next on real time at that moment. And it's based on a lot of parameters. It's based on what zone you are. If you're in the same zone as iron ore, then it's going to execute iron ore before the rest. If you're, it's a lot of parameters. It takes into consideration, well, not just travel speed, but it takes into consideration, for example, unspoiled orders, the time to reach a node, an unspoiled node. It takes into consideration a lot of stuff. So it decides which order to execute next in real time. So you can't really know the position of the orders, in which order the orders will be executed. This is for simultaneous mode. And again, this is to make it as efficient as possible. It has a reason that it's like that. But sometimes you want to tell, hey, Lisbeth, craft, these two orders first, finish them so that the inventory space opens up a little, and then craft the rest of the orders, or something like that. And that's what sequential mode was for in the previous Lisbeth. But in this Lisbeth, in the new one, I tried to actually combine sequential and simultaneous to a more flexible system. And basically what that resulted in is order groups. So you can see that all of these orders are in the same group, and groups are represented by colors. If you click on the color of an order, you can actually change the group. So for example, you can change it to red. And now red is group 2, right? So now it's going to execute the orders simultaneously. So let me repeat that this way. Lisbeth executes orders in the same group simultaneously, but the groups are executed sequentially. So it's going to finish all blue orders first, and then it's going to go ahead and start red orders. So that's basically the combination of both simultaneous and sequential. The orders within a group are simultaneous, the groups are executed sequentially. And for example, let's return this one to blue. Let's move this iron plate up. Let's change these ones to green, I guess. All right, so let me show you something now. The groups actually allow for the usage of the final product of the previous group. So in this case, since we got iron plate on its separate group before the green group, you can see that it'll craft the blue group first, the iron plate. And then here, as suborders for the second group, it now only shows 11. When before, let me disable the iron plate, it would show 12 normally. But now it shows 11 because the groups, again, are executed sequentially, and the final product of a group is used as a component for the next group, if possible, right? And if you don't want that, then just add them to the same group. And you can see now that it gets 12 iron plates plus the one you're asking for. So groups allow for much more flexibility in terms of sequential and simultaneous execution. It combines the efficiency of simultaneous. Simultaneous is time efficient, but inventory space inefficient, I guess we could say. While sequential is time inefficient, but even inventory space efficient. So yeah, that's one of the differences now between the previous Lisbeth and this one. What else? So basically, let me show you a few of the errors you would see. What's a recipe I can't craft right now? Oh, the new thread, yeah, Twin Silk. For example, Twin Silk, your weaver needs to be level 64. Twin thread, same thing, level 65, level 66. You get the idea. Now it shows you the options. You can't click them, and if you hover over them, it'll tell you why you can't actually choose them, right? Let's clear our orders. What else? So macros. All right. So this is what I've been working yesterday and today. Basically, the new macro system is much more powerful than the previous one. Now you might let me explain something, I guess. Lisbeth crafts in two ways, different ways. First, it uses crafting strategies, and then it uses macros. So these are very two distinct ways to craft, and the crafting strategies are not like macros. The crafting strategies are actual tree searches, and they require a crafting simulator. You might recognize crafting strategy names like, like Serenade or Bolero and so on. Uh, these are strategies I made which have a certain structure. Like the tree search is not completely general. Uh, it follows a certain strategy, I guess, but it's actually a search. So Lisbeth simulates the craft, thousands of times, finds the optimal solution, or at least the optimal solution it could find in a certain amount of time, and then uses that solution, which a solution is just a sequence of skills, and uses that solution to craft. And the crafting strategies, the big advantage of the crafting strategies is that uh, since they are simulated and Lisbeth searches for the solution, it can actually be used by any amount of different circumstances. So, for example, different stats. Whereas macros depend on the character having a certain amount of stats, right? Macros are much less flexible. Um, they're much more predictable, but they're much less flexible and they're much less general. So Lisbeth uses crafting strategies and allows you to enter macros. The previous Lisbeth, at least, well, now this one, I am working on the crafting strategies, but they will take time. And they will take time because, again, I have to change and fix the crafting simulator for Stormblood, which changed the formulas, added new skills. I have to program the skill effects because the crafting simulator is actually a simulation of the crafting in game. So I have to replicate the logic of the crafting in game inside Lisbeth. Uh, so for Stormblood, that involves a lot more work, and I don't think I'll have the crafting strategies ready for at least another week, perhaps. So instead, what I did was I worked on macros right now, and the macro system is much more powerful now because, well, let me show you. So now the macro system is actually an override system, and what that means is you can create a macro, by just clicking add on the macro tab. It'll add a random name to it. This is because macro names have to be unique. So it just generates a random one, but you can change it to whatever. And this number here is the priority of the macro, and this goes again back to the override system. The macros have a priority number, and you can enable or disable them. And what happens is that when Lisbeth is crafting stuff, so let's make another again. That one. Right, in case Lisbeth can't gather items, it'll show them like this. It'll show an error here, and the other ones will be grayed out, just the items you have to collect. Yeah, you know how that works. So anyways, the macros, how they work now, is that if you enable them, right, they have to be enabled, then when Lisbeth is crafting, even suborders, it'll check the macros conditions, which we'll get into a second. And if the conditions are met with the current circumstances of the craft, then it'll use that macro. And it'll use the first macro whose conditions are correct and whose priority is the lowest, right? If you don't want Lisbeth to consider a macro, you just disable it. Now you can also force a macro, and this is forcing it on the primary order, like before, right? My super macro. And this is forcing it. Lisbeth is going to use that macro, independent of the macro's conditions and all of that. This is a straight force. But what the macro override system allows is that now you don't only add macros to the primary order. Lisbeth is going to use macros on the secondary orders when the conditions of the macros are met, depending on the macro's priority. Let's add more macros here. And whether the macro is enabled as an override or not, right? So what are these macros conditions? Well, what I try to do, if you click on the macro, you see an edit button. So what I'm trying to do is, in the game, if you've been an experienced crafter or have seen videos of famous crafters in this game, you'll often see that they share macros, but they share like 4 macros. Basically what you have to do is you press one macro, then depending on where that first macro left you, you press either macro 2 or macro 3. You know, they have like a set number of macros, like 4 or 5, and then depending on the conditions of the craft, they press one or the other. So basically what I try to do is simulate that inside Lisbeth. Let me show you. Let's close this. So what happens is, let's edit a macro, and this is going to open your JSON editor. So basically macros are now JSON files. This is important. Here you can change the priority. For example, let's set it at 6. You can see that it changed here to 6. Or you can change the name, right? XL. You can see it changed here too. I definitely recommend Visual Studio Code for this. But basically, all the rest, or you can enable or disable. You can see how here it changes from true to false. But all the rest, you have to do it on the JSON file directly. And this is because it's creating a UI for this is just a lot of work, and it's never going to be as good as just editing the JSON file directly, honestly. And it's not that hard to edit it directly, to be honest. Lisbeth helps you with syntax errors, as you'll see here in a second. But yeah, I would rather work on crafting strategies or gathering or grinding or anything else rather than creating a UI for something that can be easily edited on the JSON file directly with an editor like Visual Studio Code, right? So let me show you. So what do macros have? All right, so they have a name, a priority, as we saw here. They are enabled or disabled as an override. A disabled macro can be used directly on a primary order, and it doesn't matter. This enable disable option is for overrides, so for suborders. So basically it has, right, besides that, it has conditions, which is an array of strings, as we'll see, and segments. Sorry. So conditions, what does conditions mean? Basically conditions, the conditions of a macro are, well, conditions like CP greater than 437, or the durability of the recipe has to be 40, you know? Stuff like that, that would determine if a macro is usable on your current circumstances and the current recipe or not. And basically these conditions are used by Lisbeth to determine when to apply the overrides while crafting. For example, if Lisbeth has to craft this pine lumber here, it'll first look for all the macro overrides and apply their conditions to their recipes and players' stats, and then determine based on the priority of the macros which macro to use. And if it doesn't find any useful macros, then it resorts to crafting strategies. So, but again, right now there are no crafting strategies, so there are only macros. So let me close this. All right, so what conditions are there? For example, we can add durability equals 40. That's a condition. And you can click refresh here. Whoops. Ugh, it crashed. Fun times. Let me just see quickly why it crashed. Oh, I'm using C# 7.0 features. I forgot about that. I have to. Give me a second. Just a second, guys. Sorry about this. Yeah, I forgot I'm using the tuples syntax on the project, and the rerun, but it doesn't have that assembly yet. Alright, sorry about that, guys. I forgot that I'm using the the C# 7.0 structs, which is a feature that Rerun Buddy doesn't have yet, and so I have to import the actual DLL that adds that feature. But all right, it should be working now. So, anyways, back to our macro conditions. So, for example, durability equals 40. You can click refresh here. You'll see that there are no errors. If it looks like this, there are no errors. But for example, let's add a weird symbol there, a minus. So this doesn't mean anything, right? It's basically C# syntax. This doesn't mean anything. So if we save it and refresh, it'll now show you an error. It'll tell you what it is. Unknown operation. The weird symbol we had in condition durability. So you get the idea. Lisbeth will help you with the syntax. You don't have to worry about that. It'll help you with if you have a skill that doesn't exist, a skill name that is wrong, stuff like that. Let me give you an example. So anyways, let's finish this. Let's say that for using this macro, durability has to be 40. Then we might want another condition, CP greater than 436, I guess. Refresh, no problems here. So basically, Lisbeth is going to see these conditions when crafting, and if they are correct for the current player stats and the recipe stats and all that, you can add more stuff. For example, recipe level greater than 60, stuff like that. There are a lot of variables you can use. Basically, you can use any variable relevant to crafting. I added them all. You can't use stuff like dexterity, for example. If you wanna make a macro based on your dexterity, then I don't think it's a pretty good macro. So yeah, basically the variables that exist and can be used on conditions are crafting related, right? Stuff like durability, stuff like player level, stuff like progress, the progress of the current craft, stuff like the max progress of the recipe, stuff like that. Well, this isn't very useful for the macro conditions, I guess, but it's useful for the segments, so we'll get to that. So the segments is again an array of objects. You can create the objects here. It's plain JSON. So what does a segment have? Again, a macro has many segments. This is trying to simulate the way people craft manually with multiple macros and choosing different macros based on different circumstances during the craft. So basically, a segment is a condition, which again is just a string like the other ones and use the same variables as the other ones, and a set of skills. which is an array. And the skills, you just write them by their name. And Lisbeth is going to do the mapping for you. So you can write the names on Chinese, the names on English, and Lisbeth is going to map those names into their appropriate IDs during crafting. So for example, basic touch. You can't leave a condition as empty here. If you don't want a condition on a segment, just delete it like this. But if you leave it as empty, you'll see what the error shows. Refresh. The condition has insufficient arguments. That's because every condition must have 3 arguments, 2 variables, and an operation. Right. So, for example, let's say we want the first segment to be executed all the time at the beginning, right? And let's just do basic touch, basic touch. I don't know, master's mend, I guess. So you get the idea. You just write them by their name. If no errors here. If you misspell a name, for example, let's write this. Lisbeth. Whoops. Oh, it's skills. Sorry about that, guys. It's skills here. All right. Lisbeth should be able to tell you unknown skill, basic as the touch. You just gotta fix it, right? Let's fix it here. Save. Refresh. There we go. All right. So let's make another segment. This time around, we actually want a condition. And skills. All right. Oops. All right, so skills, let's say, I don't know, careful. Since this is 3. The condition, let's just make it CP, well, quality greater than max, greater or equal than max quality. That means if the recipe already has max quality, just careful synthesis 3. Then we can add another segment. Let's just call it, let's just do it as, I don't know, you get the idea. You can add more segments with different conditions, and what Lisbeth is going to do is it's going to execute the segments in order, but only if their condition is met. So basically you can emulate what you would normally do manually, this time with Lisbeth macros. And because the macro conditions here allow the macro to be used as an override, Lisbeth is going to use that even on suborders now, automatically, based on the priority and all of that. So macros are much more powerful now. You can see that you can basically make almost any comparison, like quality greater than or equal to max quality, stuff like that, durability, CP. There's a lot of variables, but basically anything that you would need as a variable for crafting, it's there. So yeah, that's basically it. You just choose which macros to enable, choose their priority, and just run Lisbeth, and Lisbeth is going to use the macros. And Lisbeth actually does a few security checks. For example, it'll when crafting, for example, when beginning a craft, it'll see if there is a macro for it. If there is no macro nor crafting strategy that applies to your current circumstances, it'll stop to be on the safe side. It has a few other fail safes. It'll stop if you set a food to your primary order, but Lisbeth couldn't eat that food for whatever reason. Maybe you don't have any more on your inventory. Then Lisbeth is going to stop. If you force a macro here, and that macro doesn't exist, or the macro it has a syntax error for whatever reason, when Lisbeth is crafting, it's going to stop. Basically, it's going to stop anytime it can't complete the craft exactly as you wanted it to be on the safe side, so it doesn't waste materials, which might be expensive. And Well, there's a few other things I've been working on today, basically on the order processor, which is a bit more complicated than the previous Lisbeth's processor, because this time it has to take into consideration unspoiled nodes. And the way it does it is that it, it sets a timer for the next unspoiled node. Then it continues crafting normal orders, or not crafting, even gathering or whatever. It continues executing normal orders while waiting for the unspoiled node, and then when the unspoiled node actually appears, it'll stop whatever it's doing, go gather the unspoiled stuff, then go back to doing normal orders and set the next unspoiled timer and so on. So it's a bit more complicated. That's what I've been working on right now. For crafting, the logic is also more complicated. Um, I guess I might as well talk about that in this video, which is, oh, I didn't talk about priorities. That's right. Let's do something here. Leather. Let me show you something that's, I think, pretty neat. These are suborder priorities, and you can see there's all the item sources in them. You can, for example, with hard leather, it's going to buy the animal hide because buy is on the top of the list and it's enabled. You can disable buy, and then it's going to resort to grinding the animal hide. You can move grind up. So let's do that. You can move grind up the priority list before buying, and then it's going to grind. You move buy up, it's going to buy. You get the idea. These are basically how you can customize the prioritization of suborders. And if you want to disable something completely, let's say you are leveling up armorer and you don't want Lisbeth to use blacksmith at all for anything, because it might, you know, conflict with items that armor can craft. You just disable blacksmith. Lisbeth won't use blacksmith anymore, and so on. So this is pretty neat, the suborder priorities. There's a few other options: enable debug mode, and this one, which is the one I wanted to talk about, which is share your crafting results so that Lisbeth becomes more accurate when predicting progress and quality values. And that's because the crafting logic in Lisbeth, and this is also true for the previous version, it's actually fairly complicated in that it, it saves. Um, so basically, the problem is this: the crafting strategies rely on a crafting simulator, and the crafting simulator has to predict how much progress or quality you get from using a skill with a particular set of stats. And so basically, that's the crafting formulas that the game has. The formula is simply this control with this recipe level, with this player level. If you use basic touch right now with these stats, you're gonna get 55 quality, for example. That's the crafting formulas. The problem is that only Square Enix knows the exact crafting formulas. This is something, even crafting websites, like Crafting as a Service, and I think there are a few others, have struggled with. And the way Lisbeth works is that it has uh, formulas. The formulas are not exact, they have errors. And so, what Lisbeth does is whenever it crafts something, it records your state before using a skill and after using a skill. And it determines if there was a progress or quality gain by using that skill. Then compares the two states, the previous and after states, and a saves a result on disk, on a dictionary, on a map. The result is simply the player gained this much quality when using basic touch, when it had this much control, um, the player was this level 60 or whatever, and the recipe was this level. And it had these auras, but the auras are just there so the result is accurate, because there are auras that actually change levels and stats and might mess up the result. So basically, the next time that Lisbeth encounters the same stats, the same circumstances, it'll know exactly how much progress a 100% efficiency skill like Basic Touch gives. And from that, then it can determine how much Vargot's blessing or any other quality skill gives you by knowing the base value. Uh, so that's better than using theoretical formulas because it's the actual real results. So this time around, what I figured is you'll get the option to share it or not if you don't want to share these results. And again, the results only have that information. They only have the progress gained, the quality gained, your craftsmanship, your control, your level, and the recipes level. That's it. Results don't have any other information. So basically, you can now share them. And what this does is, Lisbeth will periodically upload all your results to a server, and the server using like a consensus system to remove outliers and all that will maintain a set of results uh, that people share with it. And then I'm going to add a button here somewhere where you can download that set. So when you start Lisbeth, you don't start with no results because that's bad, right? That makes the simulator less accurate. But you can download the results that people have submitted and get a full set from the get-go. So it's a matter of, I guess, crowdsourcing this kind of stuff. But again, that's the only information this collects. It doesn't collect any personal stuff. It would be stupid in my part to collect any personal stuff. It's just for results. You can opt out if you don't want to. But it does help Lisbeth be more accurate with the crafting simulator. So that's always good. So yeah, that's what I've been working on right now. I still have to finish a few touches on the macro crafting logic itself. There's a few things I don't like, and there's a few things I think I have to refactor to make them cleaner. Um, but I think I'm pretty certain that this weekend I'll be able to release the macro beta. So yep, I hope you like it, and I'll see you next time.